So welcome everybody to this 2024 Sidereal forecast. A lot of the topics I'm speaking of here are in the magazine. There's more here in the slides in a sense. We're going to go through more, but you can get a good gist of everything that we're talking about here in the magazine. So it's timelineastrology.com. And a reminder that I do have all of the sign recordings now up on patreon.com. You just can go to patreon.com/timeline astrology or just go to timelineastrology.com. So the contents for today, I'll talk about the eclipses and the comets. So now we have not just eclipses to talk about in 2024, but we've got comets to also talk about because likely, and it's not 100%, are due to appear at the time of the eclipses. So I mean, that's quite dramatic. Two eclipses, and you might as well call them total solar eclipses. One is total and one is annular. October one is said to be brighter, or it might be brighter according to astronomers that I'm listening to anyway in Ireland, but we won't know until we see them, and that's the whole rub with the comets. So I'll talk about that. Retrograde zones, obviously, as well as the retrogrades. So, and when I say retrograde zones, I mean the whole phase of the retrograde period in terms of when the planet moves past the point it will move back to and back over again. And so it takes a long time. It takes up to a year. And so it's just good to know where are those zones in your chart, and do you have planets within that zone? Jupiter and Uranus entering Taurus. This is one of the bigger shifts in 2024 and maybe more positive. And I say maybe because it can go either way and maybe both ways. So we shall see. But I think there's a lot of positivity in 2024 also. And how that might conflict actually with what's going on in the world in another kind of dire sense with wars and so on, and a lot of humanitarian crises with, climate change being an issue, of course, that continues. And Jupiter and Uranus entering Taurus is like, well, let's have a bit of fun. Especially when they're joined with Venus and Mercury and all those planets in June, although all combust, there's this sense of, well, can we have fun or should we have fun when all of the world seems to be going to rot right now? And I'd actually argue that we should, if we can. So Mars triggers. Now, all Mercury, Venus, and Mars, all of them trigger all the outer planets as they move through faster and move over all of these planets. Pluto in Capricorn, Saturn in Aquarius, Neptune and Rahu, the North Node in Pisces, Uranus and Jupiter eventually in Taurus. So they're all going to trigger it. But Mars is a particular trigger and is particularly strong for most of the year. Mars is really strong, starting off in Sagittarius, moving into exaltation, going into its own sign Aries. And in between all of that, it's triggering all of these planets. And then it finishes out the year in retrograde in Cancer, moving back to Gemini. It's going to be a Mars year. And I'll talk about why it is in many ways a Mars year on many levels. So then we finish then with the new and full moons each month, and that will give us a good flavor of each month and what each month is about. And each new moon, of course, is a new lunar month. And so that kind of gives the new energy each month, and each full moon is a kind of culmination within that month. But in particular, the new moon in April in the Vedic calendar is important, and that's a bit of a doozy. Let me put it that way. It's an eclipse, first of all, and all the planets are lining up in just 3 signs, and so on and so on. And you'll see all the conjunctions that are happening then, including Jupiter-Uranus and Mars-Saturn. So it's going to be quite a dramatic year, I'm going to have to say. Then the background hum, and it might be a distant hum with Pluto, but it is a background hum. And the reason why Pluto is so powerful is because it's so distant. And I don't think people understand this about astrology, that actually the further the planet out, the more it reflects a deeper aspect within our beings, deep within us, that we really are not aware of usually. And that's why most people aren't really familiar with Pluto in their horoscope and don't really get it. And they might get it afterwards, after the fact, after Pluto has transited through their whatever sign and hit their whatever planet after many years. They kind of get it in hindsight. But it's good to be aware of where it is in real time, so to be able to work with this energy. And the analogy, of course, is used the fact that it was discovered in the 1930s, visually discovered. Of course, it's always been there, but it was visually discovered in the 1930s, and the atomic bomb and all of that energy and, all of that being brought up again in cinema with Oppenheimer I think is relevant in terms of, again, a crashing system and even the world order, and the new world order that is having to form really out of this crashing old system. And so I think we're all going to have to get on board with this, of course, eventually, but it's only started. This is the thing. If you're tuning into this, by the way, and you're used to looking at the tropical zodiac and you're thinking, wait a minute, isn't Pluto just about to go into Aquarius in 2024 and it's done with Capricorn? Yes, on that level, on the tropical level, but in the sidereal signs, in terms of aligning with the stars, it actually has just started with Capricorn. It's actually just started dismantling the system, and it started in 2020 when lockdowns began. So this is a 20-year-long breakdown of a system, a world system. Now, again, you can draw that to your own experience and think about where this is impacting you in your chart. Where is Capricorn in your birth chart? Whether it's from your rising sign, which is the ideal one to look at first, and or your moon sign, you could look at second, and then add your sun in that order: rising, moon, sun. And you'll get a good idea about where this is impacting you. And you should have a good idea already, because it's already now 3 years. And we're moving into the 4th year of Pluto and Capricorn. In 2024, as it does every year, it'll retrograde, and it will do so from May 2nd to October 12th. So May till October, back from 7 degrees to 5 degrees. And this is important in terms of globally, and especially in terms of the US, because in the US independence chart, Pluto is returning 3 times in 2024: February 22nd, July 17th, and December 30th. This calculation is different if you use tropical zodiac, because there's the difference in what is called Ayanamsha in the calculation. And when you adjust for the precession of the equinoxes, you're going to get this calculation. So it's an important year, whatever way you spin it, and for America and the world. And the fact that the US is not only having a Pluto return, but it's also with Uranus moving into Taurus, having a Uranus return in the coming years, it is showing major upheaval in the US, and it's going to affect the whole world and the world order. So again, the big theme is overall, Pluto continues to change the world order and change whatever order you have in your life in relation to the sign Capricorn. So the other big news again is that there are 2 comets, not just 1, but 2. It's like buses, right? It's like 2 come along at the same time, and then they come along at the same time when there's an eclipse at the same time. So it's like, it's very busy, right? It's really quiet for a while, and then it's like a lot going on. So 2 comets are due to arrive in our skies in 2024, each one around the same time as eclipses in April and October. All comets are harbingers of change, just as eclipses are. The fact that these comets and eclipses appear around the same time is both thrilling and foreboding, stirring a mix of anticipation and apprehension among skywatchers and astrology enthusiasts alike. I've read quite a bit about it from Brihat Samhita, and I've written an article about it, which I'll link at the end of this, all about the eclipse and the comets. And it seems like mostly they are seen as negative. So when we think of comets, we think of quite an ominous sort of sign, and that word obviously suggests that it's quite negative. There is some occasions apparently where it is seen as positive, that it brings abundance, but it's quite rare. It's not as usual, and it all depends on the direction that they appear, how they appear, what their color is, the tail. And by the way, in ancient India, comets were called Ketus. Ketu was the original, is the word for comets, because the word Ketu literally just means tail. So then later on, of course, then it was applied to the south lunar node. And so we know Ketu these days more as the south node of the moon. But in ancient times, it was more about comets. So we're having 2 Ketus, likely to be quite bright, at least the second one, the October one, around the time of an eclipse. So it's going to be quite dramatic, and changes are afoot for sure. So these are the eclipse degrees. First one is a partial lunar eclipse in March 25th, 10 degrees of Virgo. Again, remember, I'm doing sidereal. This is the Hasta lunar mansion. I'm going to really focus more on the total and annular solar eclipses here, just for time's sake. a total solar eclipse on April 8th. This is the doozy. 25 degrees of Pisces in Revati lunar mansion. This has already been triggered, and actually the previous eclipse, a total solar eclipse in October 2023, is already being triggered right now, because that was actually at 26 degrees of Virgo opposite. So pretty much on the same point. And we have the nodes there right now. So they are shaking things up already. And I'm going to talk obviously about the nodes in Pisces and Virgo, but really they are stirring it all up already. And we're seeing a lot. We're seeing as soon as the South Node crossed over that previous eclipse degree in Virgo, there was the earthquake in Japan. We're seeing a lot of aviation issues already in Pisces. That's reflected with Rahu in Pisces. So we're going to see a lot more of that. We're going to see a lot of down jets. We're going to see a lot of maritime issues. We're going to see a lot of challenges to basics, which is Ketu and Virgo also. So these eclipses are going to really stir it up in the world in a big way. Then later on in September, we have a partial lunar eclipse on September 18th at 1 degree of Pisces, Purva Bhadrapada. This is important in terms of Saturn's transit as we go into 2025. But even into 24, we're going to see Saturn move into this lunar mansion, which I'll talk about. So there's activations going on here for sure. And then finally, we have an annular or almost total solar eclipse on October 2nd, 15 of Virgo, which gets triggered a lot in that latter part of the year with the South Node in September, October, and into the end of the year. So these are the activation points. Lunar nodes, as I mentioned, 25, 26 degrees, they go back. So 26 degrees first, that eclipse back in October has been triggered, really from the end of 2023. And then we have this 25-degree eclipse on April 8th being triggered already, mid-January. That's where we're at right now. We're seeing it. It's getting triggered. We're seeing a lot of escalation in wars. We're seeing a lot of issues in terms of the Red Sea, in terms of what's going on over in China and today's or yesterday's vote. And, what's going on in Yemen and all of that. It's all escalating now. What's going to happen subsequently is, of course, all those planets I mentioned, Mercury, Venus, and Mars are all going to transit over these degrees, right, in Pisces. But Mercury especially is an interesting one because it's going to go over the 25 degree in March. Then it's going to go retrograde and go back over it in April, and then go forward again and go back over it again in May. So March, April, May, Mercury retrograde. Mercury is going to trigger a lot. And Mercury in Pisces is seen as in its fall, in its debilitation. So it's not functioning as well. So obviously this suggests that all of these things, whether it's down jets or wars or whatever, is not good for Mercury. And we'll probably be very confused about what's going on also. But obviously Mercury represents business and trade and all of these things, and travel. Obviously travel is going to be impacted. And this is likely to be the case. What can I say? I mean, I do think that subsequently with Mars as well triggering this and everything that's going on, there's going to be just one thing after the other this year. And we're already seeing it. We're only at the 14th of January. The sun is about to move into Capricorn and meet with Pluto, but we've seen so much happen already. I just do think it's going to be one of those years where it's one thing after another. Venus will also trigger it, but it's exalted in Pisces at 25 degrees in April. That's a mitigating factor also for Mercury. So that's good news. And there is some good news, by the way, before we get all doom and gloomy about this. There is some good news in 2024. I want to assure you. We'll get to that. Mars is going to trigger 25 degrees in Pisces in May as well. And Mars is doing a lot this year. I'll talk more about Mars. Lunar nodes then at the latter part of the year will actually start in July, August, because they're going to come to 15 degrees of Virgo Pisces. And then Venus will trigger it as well in September. And the lunar nodes again, October, November. So really, we've got a lot of triggers, and especially the lunar nodes themselves, Rahu and Ketu, transiting over the eclipse degrees are ones to watch. So those months, whether it's, again, January as we speak in 2024, or later on in the summer, July, August, September, and even into the end of the year. So they are the main activation points of the eclipses, and we're going to see that a lot. So it's basically all year long, major activations of these positions. So what are they? So basically we got Rahu in Pisces, Ketu in Virgo. I've written an article about this, and I've again linked that at the end, and I'll show you. You can access that and read it if you'd like. I won't go through all of the details here, but it has throughout history brought up a lot of issues in terms of maritime and aviation. And that's quite obviously because Rahu in Pisces, and Pisces represents the ocean, but also reflected in the skies. So we're going to see a lot more of that. And historically, the Titanic sank as soon as Rahu moved into Pisces. We saw a lot of down jets. We saw a lot of now we also could see the potential for a lot more of space exploration and all of that, and a lot more things that kind of boggle the mind in many other ways. I'm not going to get into that in terms of disclosures or UFO things or anything like that. I don't know, but apart from that, space travel I think is going to be a major one. Ketu and Virgo, though, is kind of more challenging because Virgo is about being more exacting and being more practical and down to earth and having everything orderly. And Ketu removes things. So there's going to be a lack of order and chaos in 2024 because of this in some way. Even if it's just we sense that, and if it's not something tangible in our life, because the nodes, of course, aren't tangible. They are not visible. They're shadowy. And so we get a sense of things going on, but we're not really quite sure. Sometimes, of course, they come out very obviously, and that usually happens as it is happening right now when the eclipses themselves are being activated. And as I said, all the eclipses are activated all year, really, I think. So we're going to see a lot of activations. When they're not being activated, it kind of like slips back into the background maybe, but we get this kind of underlying sense of things shifting around. Now, of course, again, if you can draw that into your own life experience and know where these signs are, where Virgo and Pisces sit in your horoscope from your rising sign, moon sign, sun sign, that's going to help you more deal with that. And I guess the best way to deal with that in a general way is to recognize that Ketu's more analytical, maybe not even analytical, but hypercritical nature in Virgo is probably best served by really tuning into something deeper within yourself that is still, that is watching, that is unperturbed by anything that's going on anyway. And then you don't get caught in this trap of things not being right, you know. Rahu in Pisces is probably best experienced by tuning out somewhat, but not copping out and not avoiding things and disassociating whatever way you might do that. And certainly to be mindful of advice that you're getting and whatever area that's impacting your chart in your life, to be really, I guess, clear about something before you make a decision, because this certainly could create like really extremes, I would say, and to be really mindful of that. So this is the breakdown in terms of the lunar mansions. Rahu is currently in Revati, the last lunar mansion of the zodiac, from November 23 until July 2024. That is a more auspicious lunar mansion in many ways, but of course Rahu is Rahu, and it tends to create these kind of more extreme circumstances. And Revati is ruled by Pushyan, the shepherder. It's the archetype shepherd, where he's shepherding his flock, where it's really about shepherding souls from one life to the next. And actually, Pisces, as auspicious as it might sound, the lunar mansions in Pisces are very much about death. I mean, it is the 12th sign of the zodiac after all. It's about loss and death. And so if we can tune into the more auspicious sort of spiritual aspects of these lunar mansions and Rahu's more spiritual side, you might say, without being obsessive about it or tuning out or copping out, then I think we've got a better chance of dealing with this in a better way. So again, especially in terms of what is true, because we might easily kind of fool ourselves into thinking something's true just so we can tune out for a while. And there's a lot to tune out of, and I understand it, but tuning in, I guess, like the saying goes, the only way out is in, is a good one, I think, that you can apply here. Then it goes back into Uttara Bhadrapada, the latter auspicious steps, and its symbol is a funeral cot. So, I mean, death is certainly a symbol there. It has a depth to it. It's kind of got this serpent energy anyway. So Rahu and this lunar mansion create this depth, but it also creates a lot of confusion. It also, again, brings in that kind of depth in terms of the seas. Lots of issues around seas, of course, that goes without saying. There's going to be a lot of more issues in 2024. I think even more than recent years, where we might see catastrophic flooding. I mean, I don't think I can overstate that. That's from July until February next year, 2025. Uttara Bhadrapada. It is a more auspicious, and both of these are Uttara and Revati. They're seen as more auspicious lunar mansions, but Rahu is Rahu, and it casts a shadow wherever it goes. It creates confusion where ideally there is clarity. But more especially, Rahu is said to create more confusion in terms of the sign it's in, the sun sign, i.e. Pisces. So being mindful of how Rahu is impacting Pisces and where Pisces is in your chart, and the general sense of not knowing what's right or wrong, I would say, is going to be a major theme. Of course, religious institutions are going to be impacted by this, and I'm thinking about the Pope and what might be going on there. But just in general, righteousness and what's right and what's true is going to be a big, big theme. Ketu, on the other hand, is said to impact the lunar mansions more so. So Ketu's transit is important to look at in terms of its transit backwards through Chitra currently until February 7th, and then in Hasta until the end of the year, December 2nd. So for most of the year, it's really in Hasta, in Virgo. Chitra and Hasta, what they might have in common is that it's very much about precision, but Chitra is associated with Mars, and it creates this kind of warlike scenario, obviously. And actually, I was even reading today about the correlation with the Greek god um, with this lunar mansion. And I can't remember the name because I'm not really good with Greek gods, but I think it was Hephaestus, I think it is. And basically, it's the god of volcanoes. And today we've seen yet again Iceland, the volcano erupt in Iceland. And now it's not just erupted, like really erupted, but actually it's burning houses as we speak in that town that they cleared. So Ketu and Chitra, as I said, Ketu and Virgo in general removes the basics. It challenges the very basics. Chitra is more fiery in that sense, you might say. Hasta is associated with the moon more so, but it is still about precision, and it's ruled by Savitur, the sun god, the sun deity. And I think we're going to, again, because of that, combined with Rahu, see a lot of confusion because Ketu and any association with the sun and Hasta now is going to create that kind of challenge about what is right, what is true. We're not going to be clear about that. There's going to be a lot of untruths. So I think this image captures it really well in terms of the kind of serpentine energy, but it's kind of usually represented by the Ouroboros, like the snake devouring its own tail. There's a kind of completion that can be experienced as well with the nodes. But here, because Rahu is in Pisces, which is associated more with Ketu, and Ketu is in Virgo, which is associated with more with Rahu. So they're not really at home. They're in each other's places. They're out of sync in a way. So this image, I think, really captures this kind of not really getting it, not coming full circle, or not really understanding it, or whatever it might be, and fill in the blank, right? There's going to be a sort of underlying unnerving sense of something not right. And this kind of thrashing about that's going to happen in 2024. The other thing that's happening, of course, is that Neptune is in Pisces. So Rahu is going to conjoin with Neptune. It doesn't exactly conjoin until February next year, 25, but it's there. They're both in the same sign. Neptune in Pisces is itself confusing. And even though that's a better kind of mix of energies, they mix well together. It's like, Neptune, it's, the god of the oceans, right? And it's in Pisces. So that seems to be, all of that fits. But again, it just creates this even more confusing state when you mix in Rahu, which is a shadow. So shadows and like blurriness and idealism that is not rooted in reality, a dream that can never be a reality is quite potential. The other side of that is that, and especially if you consider Saturn's transit in here by 2025, after, Neptune and Rahu come together in February, we got in March 2025, Saturn move into Pisces. The best way I think of using that is to have a dream, to have that ideal in your mind, one that is achievable, and then work towards that goal with Saturn and make it real. That's obviously the best use of these transits. But we're obviously on the other side of it going to see the opposite, where we're going to see a lot of people kind of thinking about unreal situations that are not in any way possible. Neptune is going to go retrograde as it does every year from July to December, 5 degrees back to 2 degrees of Pisces. So just check that in your chart. Again, it might impact you. You might not have a sense of it because it's already confusing. So again, just as with Pluto, Neptune is very far out and people don't see it. People don't get it. But if you can understand at least where it's happening in your chart and this confusion, or at least, looking at it as maybe an idealism that can lead to sort of like a fantastical view of this part of your life, to be more real about that, and at the same time to dream the dream. That's the important thing to note here. There's something that you can achieve here if you keep it in perspective. I want to talk about Mercury retrograde because it's doing something really interesting. Like, it seems like all the planets are doing something really interesting in 2024, but back from the fire signs into the water signs, because you have water first, then fire, you have Cancer, then Leo, you have Scorpio. It's going to do the whole retrograde in Scorpio, but in Aries and Pisces is the most interesting one in April. So it's going to go into Aries, but then it's going to retrograde from 3 degrees of Aries back to 25 degrees of Pisces. Remember, what did I say is happening at 25 degrees? It's the eclipse in April. And Mercury is going to retrograde and station on that degree. So what the hell is that? I don't know. It's confusing as hell. We don't know what's going on. It's going to be a really interesting spring, summer in 2024 for sure because of this. And all Mercury retrogrades are an opportunity, obviously, to kind of tune out for a while of all the noise. But this seems, and especially in Pisces in April, to be very noisy. There's just too much going on. There's an eclipse, there's a comet, there's a retrograde Mercury, there's conjunctions, as we'll see, with Mars and Saturn, Uranus and Jupiter. It's just too much. And the mind is going to be overwhelmed. So the best thing to do in that case is try and really tune out as much as possible and getting clear about something, of course, at the same time, not disassociating, but actually really tuning in more. And again, I would refer to that saying, the only way out is in, and that is certainly relevant in a Mercury retrograde. So I'll just show you its conjunctions with other planets throughout the year, just to kind of give you a heads up. But this is just a brief, Mercury is a very fast moving planet. So it conjoins Mars by the end of January. That's an important one because its recent retrograde through the end of 2023 conjoined Mars around between Christmas and New Year's on December 27th. And now on January 27th, it's going to meet with Mars again. And it could be that thing you didn't say over Christmas and New Year's might be said by the end of January. So just to be mindful, of course, of how you say it, I would say. Then it meets with Pluto in February. Then it meets with Saturn by the end of February. And this is also when Saturn and the Sun come together, end of February. So that'd be interesting because you've got Saturn and the Sun together and Mercury all together at the same degree, 28th of February. This is usually a challenge in terms of world affairs, in terms of governments and the people and riots and protests, but it's the middle of winter, so I don't know how much of that would be coming onto the streets, but certainly is a kind of like angsty time. Then it conjoins Neptune in March, and this is confusing for Mercury for sure, and it's going to spend so long here, going back and forth. March, April, May, it won't get out. So yeah, I think this is going to be a confusing March, April, May for sure. It meets with Rahu by the end of March, and then in April it meets with Venus. That's definitely a mitigating factor. There's a better situation here because of Venus in Pisces exalted, so better things to come. And it meets again with Venus later on in the year in August. It meets with Uranus in May, and then Ketu later on in the year in September, which, as I'll talk about with Venus also meeting Ketu in September, could be another hot spot in the year in terms of after everything that's blown over throughout the year, the October eclipse and September period leading up to that October eclipse could be a wobble in terms of the economy and so on. That's Ketu and Venus coming together in Virgo. So again, the basics being challenged, we might say. So let's get into the retrograde zones and where these planets are moving back and over. So this is just good to be mindful of if you have any planets here. I'll just give you the dates, and I'm going in chronological order so that, I'm not going in order of the planets. It's just going in terms of when the planets begin this process. So the first is Pluto, which has already begun. So January 9th, it entered the retrograde zone in terms of it's gone past 5 degrees and whatever minutes, and it will move back to that. And then it won't move out of that zone at 7 degrees that it begins to retrograde until February 2025. So you can see it's a whole year for Pluto. So for a whole year between 5 and 7 degrees of Capricorn, Pluto is going back and over. And if you have any planets between 5 and 7 degrees of Capricorn or your ascendant or any points, they're being impacted by Pluto and all the process I mentioned. Mercury, of course, does that much more. January 20th, it's moving out of its retrograde zone. It left, it's leaving it soon. And so it actually hasn't really figured out all the things that it was trying to figure out, as in our minds haven't figured out everything from the end of last year, 2023. And by 20th of January, we kind of can move forward again into fresh territory. So things can sort of move forward then. March, again, though, it moves into a retrograde zone and it doesn't move out of that until May. So that's the particular time I'm going to really point out. March, April, May, from 25 degrees of Pisces to 3 degrees of Aries. That zone is really triggered. And it's a really watery and fiery zone, shall we say. So there's a lot of water and fiery issues. And I mean, we're literally seeing that play out in terms of bombing on the sea. I mean, you couldn't think of it any other kind of literal way. It's so literal. So that's something to be mindful of in that period, especially March, April, May. July, it does it again and moves through the retrograde zone and at 26 degrees of Cancer and doesn't move out until September. Again, this is volatile because it's between 26 of Cancer and 9 Leo, water and fire again. So Mercury doesn't function well in water anyway, but water and fire, it's going to be quite explosive and confusing in many ways. And, you know, again, Mercury type of things being challenged. Everyday stuff, travel, business, communications, all of that. And then finally, November, it moves into retrograde zone in Scorpio, and it's all of its retrogrades in Scorpio, finishing out and moving into a new phase in January 2025 in the Scorpio. But even then, it's the end of Scorpio, you know, into 2025. So it's quite a volatile phase there by the beginning of 2025. Saturn begins in February. Sorry, it moves out of its retrograde zone in February, as in the last retrograde zone, because it passes the 13-degree mark of Aquarius. So it doesn't move into the next retrograde zone until March, and then it moves out of that by February next year, 2025. So this new zone is 18 degrees to 25 degrees of Aquarius. If you have any planets at 18 degrees or 25 degrees of Aquarius, those March 2024, February 2025 are the dates to be mindful of, because Saturn is going to halt, stop on that planet, kind of pin it down and focus so much on it that you can't avoid the issue. And so to be really mindful of what the issue is in the first place is really helpful, so that you don't avoid it, that you accept it, that you deal with it, that you look at it, that you do something with it. You can't avoid it, really. You could try, and Aquarius certainly is that kind of sign that could sort of disassociate and not want to deal with it. But we really have to. Now, the whole theme of Saturn in Aquarius is this fear of AI. That's one of the big themes we're seeing in the world right now. I mean, yeah, you don't want to avoid it. You want to put in place, and they seem to be putting in place, steps to make sure that it's safe. But you can't hold progress, is what I want to say. And that's what Aquarius is all about. We just have to be mindful of how we implement these new systems. Okay, so moving on to Neptune, it moves into the retrograde zone by March this year, and then March next year it moves out. So from 2 degrees to 5 degrees of Pisces. Again, if you have any planets there, I mentioned those degrees. Just to be mindful of that maybe vague notion and idealism bordering on fantasy, and maybe pull it back into more reality. Jupiter is leaving the retrograde zone, its last retrograde last year, by March. So it moves past 21 degrees. So it's going to move into Taurus. It's moving into new territory in May. I'm going to talk about that. That's definitely one of the highlights of the year in many ways. There's some definitely challenges there too. But we can certainly enjoy something here. But it's going to move into its retrograde zone by July, and it won't move out of its retrograde zone till next April 2025. So that's a whole nearly a year of Jupiter in Taurus, 17 degrees to 27 degrees. So that's an easy one to remember, that 10 degrees between 17 and 27 degrees of Taurus. If you have planets there, you might say that this zone is going to be more fortunate. It's going to expand, but it really depends on what you're expanding. Of course, you really need to know what that is, because sometimes it's not a good idea to expand in certain areas. But mostly, for most people, it's probably going to be welcomed, I would say. Uranus. So from May this year, 24, till May next year, that's easy to remember. Uranus is moving through this zone from 28 degrees of Aries to 3 degrees of Taurus. So we're now at this new juncture and new story of Uranus moving into Taurus, having or finishing by the end of this year or into 2025. So it won't happen until 2025, the beginning of that. Uranus moves into Taurus again for the second time and then stays in Taurus for 7 years. So that's a whole other story, but we have to finish out the Aries story. And Uranus in Aries is volatile, and since it moved in 2016, it's shook the world. It really has. And it continues to do so. So it is going to continue to in 2024, but we're still having this sense of something coming in that's different now. And Taurus is also being shook in a way. And so in a way, that's even more challenging because Taurus likes to be steady. And there's no thing steady in 2024. We really have to get on board with sort of reinventing the wheel in a way. And apart from that, though, I think it's still not as challenging as Aries at the end of the day, because Aries is about war. And yes, Uranus in Taurus has meant war for the US in particular historically. So that's a whole other thing. But in terms of the next 7 years, for us personally, what I mean is that there could be something here we can enjoy. And I again would say that actually, in times of war and in times of upheaval on the planet, and as this continues to escalate through these years to come, it's actually even more important that we find something to enjoy because we need to get that balance right. We really do. Anyway, Mars is going to go retrograde in 2024. And so the retrograde zone begins in October. It moves into that zone at 22 degrees of Gemini. It will move out of that zone in May 2025 at 11 degrees of Cancer. That whole period, the end of 2024 and beginning of 2025, is this Mars retrograde zone, 22 degrees of Gemini to 11 Cancer. That's a tricky place for Mars to be for sure, in Cancer more especially. And so we're going to see a lot of setbacks in the winter of 24, 25. And of course, you're thinking, I'm sure, as most of us will be, about the US election. That's going to be chaos, I would say. And, you know, we could use a lot of extreme language here, but I'll hold back until I show you that slide. But yeah, it's probably going to be chaotic. In our individual lives, we have to be really patient in the winter of 24, 25 and all the setbacks that are possible. There is a positive here, and that in Cancer, Mars is retrograde and is a better position in a way, because it almost like it's like a double negative. Mars in Cancer is in its fall and debilitation. It's weak. It goes retrograde, it becomes strong, but it's also weak. So it's like this kind of lashing out if you feel weak and in any way held back. So we're going to see a lot of acting out as well. But if we're mindful of it ourselves, we can use this energy of Mars over the winter, next winter, to be really able to channel this energy, this strong energy. It's a strong energy for sure. Finally, then Venus is not going retrograde in 2024, but I just thought I'd highlight it the next year because it's going to go retrograde at a really pivotal time in history. But I'm not going to talk about 2025 too much here. It's going to go into the retrograde zone January 25 and then not move out until May 25. And it's going to do so in Pisces from 0 degrees to 16 of Pisces, exalted. It's a strong position, but it's complicated in a time that is very complicated. I mean, if you think 2024 is complicated, it's just a preview of 2025 in a way. And I think we're going to see some massive changes on the planet and major uprisings and revolutions. And I've been talking about this for a long time. I've written all about it in some articles you can read. I'll, again, give you the links. But I think there's going to be major, major upheavals and like a new world order emerging eventually from all of this. So Jupiter to the rescue. Okay, I might have done this too much. I tend to kind of go overboard with stuff. But anyway, because I've discovered AI and DALL-E art, and you know, I can type in anything I want it to give me. It's just that I'm a bit like a kid again with this new tech. So pardon me if I've gone overboard with all of this tech. But anyway, Jupiter is coming to the rescue in 2024. So Jupiter is moving into Taurus in May until May of 25. So this has its positive and negatives. Like every planet in every sign, in every house has a positive and a negative side. You have to kind of think of both. But the positives, I suppose, would be pleasure, enjoyment, comforts, luxury even. This would even go into kind of more extreme luxury. Really wanting the best of the best of the best in life. And it's probably also because of what's happening elsewhere, and especially when we think about Saturn and Pluto and everything else that's going on. So it's understandable. And I think we should treat ourselves if we can. And I would put it this way to you, that if you're in a position financially and geopolitically to be able to enjoy whatever you have to enjoy, then actually the onus is on you to enjoy that, whatever's going on in the world elsewhere, because Jupiter represents what they call in Indian astrology, Purva Punya. This is like the past life credits. So you were born into the person you were born into, and the wealth and privilege and whatever you have been born into to give thanks to. And so if you don't enjoy them and you instead think about all the people who don't have that, then actually no one's enjoying Jupiter. And so we have to get a balance right. In other words, we have to appreciate where we are, what we have, while still hopefully being able to help other people. But this is important. And this is going to be, I feel, a big theme in 2024. Can we enjoy ourselves when the world seems to be falling apart? Can we enjoy ourselves when there's wars, when there's genocide, when there's fill in the blank? Can we enjoy ourselves when even just around us, like we can see people suffering, even just right around us? And I would say that, yes, it's conflicted because Taurus is always conflicted with Aquarius. Taurus and Aquarius are in a square aspect to each other all the time. We always have this. It's always been the case that Taurus and enjoyment and pleasure is conflicted with crises that are happening around the world all the time. And there always is a crisis going on with Aquarius. So, but we still have to live with it. We have to live with both. We have to find space for both of it. And if you think about stories of people who live through wars, they do find pleasure in the simplest of things, you know, at the most dire of times. And I think we have to think about that in that way. So as every planet goes retrograde from October 24 until February 2025, and from again 27 back to 17 degrees of Taurus, these are the lunar mansions. It begins the year in Ashwini until February, then it goes into Kritika. You know, after Jupiter and Uranus conjoin, so conjoined Uranus, 27 degrees of Aries, April 20th is a big point of like transition in a way. But even after this, as they both file into Taurus, first Jupiter on May 1st, Uranus on June 1st, this whole period with Kritika, I mentioned this in a previous video if you've listened to my post, but Kritika is very much about energy infrastructure, and previous transit historically with Saturn, and I can't remember the other planet, but it was when all of the overhead wires were installed. So it literally electricity. So now that we're having Jupiter and Uranus conjoin in Kritika, which is about energy, literally ruled by Agni, the god of fire, it's all about energy. But especially in Taurus, is about infrastructure. And so that's obviously literally energy that's been fed through the grid. That is going to be impacted by this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. And then also, by the way, before any of that, we have in February, March, we have Mars aspecting. So that's a whole other I'm going to talk about. But there's a lot of triggers here with Kritika. It's quite a sharp one, Kritika. This square that I mentioned, it's quite the big story for the next couple of years, actually, not just this year, because actually continues into 2025. So Jupiter and Saturn square each other on two occasions in 24. August 19th and December 24th are the exact squares. They do so again in June 2025. That time it would be Gemini Pisces. Now it's Taurus Aquarius. And again, squares are just conflicted in general. But when you put planets in them and Jupiter, Saturn, but you also add Uranus into the mix, it just adds more conflict. And the conflict we've been dealing with Uranus and Saturn in Aries, Capricorn in recent years in 2020, 21, 22 was the conflict of our need for freedom and that being held back by lockdowns, Aries, Capricorn. Now the conflict will be Taurus, Aquarius. And that is essentially our need to enjoy ourselves, to have some stability in life. And this Aquarian high-tech, full-on, full-tech world that we're facing into right now. And also all of that humanitarian crisis. So because of the AI and the high-tech and all of the digitalization of everything, and also because of the Uranus and Jupiter conjunction, which actually could even throw a spanner in the works in that sense. When everything is digital, nothing is analog, nothing's on paper anymore, this could create some tension. Above all of the tension that I mentioned in terms of just living our life and kind of having this square going on. So apart from that, without getting too doom and gloomy about it, let's just talk about the square in a general sense for us individually. I would say that it's kind of like you have this big idea, that's the Jupiter, and Saturn is asking you now to follow through. That's the square to Saturn. And this might feel a bit conflicted, and it might feel like a hard edge, and you might feel like, okay, I had this dream, I wanted this thing, this ideal situation, and in order for me to implement this now, I'm going to have to deal with this thing as well. So this is where we have to kind of feel this rub, this conflict between these two planets this year and next year. And if you're willing to do the work and you're willing to test your theories and big ideas, then of course, what you want is achievable. If you're not willing to do the work and you kind of cop out, or you just tune out in some way, or you disassociate through whatever means, and you just think it's all going to land in your lap for some reason, some miraculous reason, then it might not. Like it might, I'm not saying it won't, but it might not either. The best way to assure that you're going to make whatever you want happen is to work towards it, obviously. And then you get the best of both worlds. You get Jupiter and Saturn. And by the way, Jupiter and Saturn are now going to be aspecting Scorpio combined. So that area of your life is going to feel both. And that's going to feel more positive because Scorpio's been just feeling with Saturn recently. So that's more positive. Then Uranus and Taurus. So this is obviously a picture more of Jupiter, but actually this is quite to scale, I think. I asked the AI to do this. I think it's pretty much to scale. I double checked. And this is Uranus. You might think that Uranus is massive. Well, look at the size of Jupiter beside it. It's just humongous. Jupiter is so big that if you were traveling to our solar system from afar, the sun and Jupiter will be the first things you see. And they sort of like transit around each other in a way, as opposed to us all just transiting around the sun. We all kind of move around sun and Jupiter. So that's something to think about. And I'm saying that deliberately because I think it's really important that we stabilize with Jupiter, and especially in Taurus, because now that we've got Uranus moving into Taurus, it can be very destabilizing. So it moves in on June 1st, briefly until December 13th, but that's 6 months nearly. So we're going to deal with that. It goes back into Aries until March 18th, 2025, and then goes back into Taurus. And I don't even know if there'll be cash around after this, to be honest with you. I don't know what we're going to be eating. It's probably going to be lab grown. I don't know. It's going to be crazy, I'm sure, in many ways. But at the same time, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be different. It might challenge Taurus because Taurus doesn't like change. But if we can embrace it, and whatever area of your life you have Taurus, if you can embrace the change already before we head into this period, then when it seems like this comes out of nowhere, like an unexpected event happens or something just blindsides you, and in a positive way, it could be a very positive change that happens for you, but it's still change. And Taurus, like I said, doesn't like change. So get on board now. Retrograde from September 1st, 24 until January 30th, 25. So it's going from that 3 degrees of Taurus. It only makes it to 3 degrees, goes back to 29 of Aries. So it's just peaking back into Aries by the end of the year and then going back into Taurus in March. So that's something to think about, obviously, in terms of wars and all of that. But apart from that, again, think about Taurus and what that's doing for you. It's going to square Saturn, as I mentioned. I talked about that. I won't go on about it. It is quite a hard edge. It's quite conflicted. But it's also trining Pluto. And I think that's more positive in one way. And of course, in another way, you could say, well, actually, that means that things escalate really easily. So as Pluto continues to challenge the systems, the old systems in Capricorn, and Jupiter now is placing new systems, banking money systems in place, that seems to be like happening easier in 2024, in fact, and in 25 and onwards, that there's going to be more easy implementation of these things. And you might say, and you might be right in saying, and even if people call you cynical in saying it, but you might be right in saying that it's actually only when systems collapse that you're more willing to get on board with the new one. And this is indeed what might be happening in 24 onwards. Banking system, money, whatever. If you're not into digital currencies, I'm not, I don't have any, but eventually I'm sure I'm going to have to, like everyone else. And, you know, it's not that I don't want to, it's just I don't know how to even, but it just might happen easier from 24 onwards. So again, Saturn, it's in Aquarius from January 23. It actually peaked into Aquarius previous year, 22, but that was a brief one. January 23 until March 2025. So all of 24, of course, into March 25, we're still living with this Saturn in Aquarius. And again, it's bringing up a lot of sort of dystopian views of the future. That's what I would say. Saturn is sometimes, of course, a bit depressive, you know. It's a bit too realistic, you might say. And sometimes it's so blinkered, I would say. And in Aquarius, of course, it's all about the future. And yeah, we don't need to be blinkered right now, I don't think. Put it that way. So it goes retrograde from June to November, 25 back to 18 Aquarius. Again, highlight those points in your chart if you have any planets there or between those 2 degrees. Lunar mansions, Shadbishaj, the 100 healers. It began that in November 23 until April this year. And then it goes into Purva Bhadrapada in April till October. It will go retrograde. So it will go back from October, the end of this year, until December briefly, and then go back into Purva Bhadrapada. So it's kind of mixed this year in terms of these two. It spends 1 year in one lunar mansion. It's quite straightforward. But when it goes retrograde back and forth like this, it kind of mixes it up. But anyway, you can see from till April, Shatabishaj is still the theme. It's lorded by Varuna, the god of the ocean. Big stories there. Then it goes into Purva Bhadrapada, and it's a more fierce, as it's called, lunar mansion, and fiery, and wants to get to the truth. And Saturn here could also aid that for sure. So from April till October, we can certainly see the potential there, but it's destructive as well. Purva Bhadrapada is like a lightning bolt, you know, it's destructive. It's a fierce form of Shiva that is ruling this lunar mansion. So we need to be mindful of that, I would say, in the summer. So Mars. Yeah, this is where I think things can get really heated, obviously. And Mars initially, I mean, there's a lot going on with Mars this year. And I know this image is like way over the top, but I just fed whatever I did into AI and it went to town on it, right? So obviously this is a very doom and gloom sort of looking image, but it's just a metaphor, right? It's just kind of thinking about this in a more extreme way. Mars is going to square Jupiter February 27th and then Uranus March 9th. February, March, as Mars is exalted in Capricorn, is quite a trigger for sure. It has been in the past. I don't even know if I should say this, but I think I've said it on another video, so I might as well. Historically, Mars squaring Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, the last time that happened in this section of the zodiac was 1941. So 1941, if you know your history, well, you know what happened then. And I don't think that we should ignore the potential for that kind of thing happening again. And I think we need to be really mindful of ourselves as well and what we are doing in our own life at this time, because Mars is a trigger and Uranus is volatile and Jupiter expands on a theme. So we need to be really mindful as it squares these two planets and they're in Aries, Mars is signed. That's the key thing. They don't move out of Aries until May, June. So this square I've highlighted in particular, February, March. Mars is retrograde, as I mentioned, 11 degrees of Cancer back to 22 degrees of Gemini. And as it does that, it opposes Pluto on 3 occasions because of that. So November this year, January 3rd, April 27th next year. So we're going to see quite a lot of Mars Pluto at the end of the year, obviously then. And that again, in terms of US election, what's going on there, Mars Pluto oppositions are fraught. That's for certain. But how that all pans out, well, we can get into my predictions later, but I really think that we're going to see a lot of conflict. Mars conjoins planets Pluto, first of all, February 14th. Valentine's will be interesting. I'm just imagining, like, I probably shouldn't be joking about it, but like, imagining like a couple across the table from each other, like knives and forks at the ready. Okay, that was a joke. So definitely a lot of power struggles, and I would be really mindful on Valentine's around that. Mars and Pluto is a power struggle. Saturn and Mars is conflicted for sure, and this is part and parcel of the April eclipse. April 8th is the eclipse, and they're practically on each other by that stage, and the exact conjunction is April 10th. Attacks, shutdowns, we've had that previously in recent years. That's literally when we started lockdowns, but I'm not going there, but I do think in this current climate, it's all about war, and we need to be really mindful of how this can escalate all year, because this is a signature of the whole year, because the April 8th eclipse is the Lunar New Year. So anyway, Neptune is the next conjunction, April 29th. That's a lot of uncertainty, and it's like the fog of war kind of thing, but a lot of possibility as well, I would say. Then a lot more confusion, obviously, with Rahu and volatility and uncertainty and a block. Mars doesn't like Rahu in a sense. It overdoes it and then it kind of feels wiped by it. So May, we might feel a bit wiped. And we might feel wiped as well because of other things that are going on in May, which are quite enjoyable with Venus and Jupiter and Taurus and all of that going on. It might be just too much of a good time and you just feel completely wiped. Then it conjoins Uranus. Obviously, this is a major trigger. July 15th is the exact conjunction, but that whole phase coming up to this, surprise attacks, surprising news, maybe even good news, but certainly not good news in terms of wars, and certainly not good news in terms of even more wars and further escalation in current wars, unfortunately. Jupiter then, it meets with Jupiter on August 14th, and then that is more fortunate, and you might think of that like sort of wise decisions coming after kind of the attack, or just more discernment after the fact, maybe. So Venus transits as every year. I mean, it's transiting all of these planets as well. It's triggering them, but of course, Venus is a bit more enjoyable. And then this image of Venus is maybe she's going overboard. And I think this is a good representation of what Venus might do, in fact, this year. So it conjoins Pluto around that whole period. Remember, Valentine's, Venus and Mars conjoin Pluto. So that's going to be an interesting Valentine's for sure. Mars, then it conjoins exactly on February 22, and then Saturn March 23rd, and it's also very close by latitude, so not just longitude but actually latitude as well, so they're really close to each other. And again, that might be the sort of overdoing it and then having to pull back. Neptune then April, and then Rahu end of April, and then Uranus in May. And in May in particular, like I said, it is going to be enjoyable, but it's also combustible. So it's going to be combust from April to July, exact in June, moving from morning to evening star. And I think that's going to be when, it's going to be over the top. It's just going to be too much. And maybe for a good reason. Maybe we need to just enjoy ourselves because of everything that's going on. But I think it's going to be too much in the summer. It's going to be in Pisces in March, April, which is a mitigating factor for all that confusion that's going on, for sure. But then again, May, June, like I said, is like a party. And, it's like work hard, play hard kind of thing, I would say. And then in Virgo, that's a challenge because in Virgo, of course, it's in debilitation, it's fall, and it's weaker, and it's conjoined Ketu by September 3rd. Now, I did a separate video about the potential of a stock market crash in 2023. It didn't occur, of course, but now we're looking at 2024 as this is like another fallout in a sense. And this is a really fallout because it's conjoined Ketu right in the middle of the sign, aspecting or triggering that eclipse in October as well. And the only, I guess, thing we have to hold on to again is the Jupiter, because Jupiter is aspecting this. So Jupiter might be holding it together along with Saturn in 2024. Then let's get into the new and full moons. The major ones anyway, especially the April one and the eclipses and the next one in October. So we've already had this new moon on January 11th, 26 degrees of Sagittarius. Again, remember, sidereal, Purvashada, it's very much about, interestingly enough, it's very much about water. It's ruled by the goddess of water. It is in fiery Sagittarius. It is Sagittarius, which is all about travel. And what are we seeing? We're seeing lots of issues around planes. So that's going to be a big theme, though, I think, for the year. And we're having the year end with another new moon in Sagittarius in Purvashada. So the year is bookended by two new moons in Purva Ashada, while Rahu in a square to these new moons in Pisces is really stirring it up. I mean, I don't want to put you off traveling, especially flights, but yeah, I do think there's going to be a lot of news around that this year. So the full moon coming up then is on January 25th. It's at 11 degrees of Cancer. And so Mercury and Mars, this is when they come together, just a reminder. So I would just, again, be cautious in terms of what you're saying here. It's a full moon. It's always a bit full on. It's an emotional one. It's in Cancer, and it's aspected by Rahu and Mars. And it's kind of like that Mercury-Mars trigger is, again, the things that weren't said over the Christmas period might get said now, and that's something to be mindful of. I'm going to whip through them now. So February, there's a new moon, February 9th, 26th, Capricorn, Danishta. And you can see here that Mars and Pluto are coming together at this point. And, well, that's a whole thing. And I would say, and you can see here as well that Venus is about to join them. So by the end of February. And so Mars, Venus, Pluto triggers, that's going to be a major thing in February, obviously. Again, I would say enjoy the Valentines, but like be mindful of the kind of power plays that could, ensue. This is the full moon, Leo, 11 degrees, Magha. This is the royal sign, Regulus, and Venus and Mars are now together. And Pluto is not far from it. And then we have the sun, which rules the moon, together with Saturn. So this is still a kind of continual kind of power struggle, that whatever started at the beginning of February in the new moon is continuing here into more obvious power struggles. Again, the more obvious ones are in the world and in governments and people and tech and all that, all of those things, all the crises that are happening in the world. But again, personally, how you deal with it obviously is a very individual thing. I want to get to the April one in particular. March, new moon is 26 degrees of Aquarius, Purva Bhadrapada. This is important because, of course, this is where Saturn is moving into later on in April. So Saturn is going to activate this lunar mansion. It's a very fierce lunar mansion. It is, one of the symbols is like standing on one leg in penance. And it's kind of like very getting to the point of something in a way and getting to the truth more than anything. And Saturn is better at getting to the truth, than any of these other planets hanging around like Rahu, Neptune, all of these things that are going to. Neptune's been through here. It's finishing up in this lunar mansion soon. Rahu is going to move into this lunar mansion the end of the year or next year. It's confusing as hell, and we need a bit of Saturn in this case, and I think this new moon with Saturn is actually a positive thing in many ways because we can just kind of be more clear. Now, what's happening also at the same time, as I mentioned, is Mars is aspecting Uranus. This new moon is a trigger for that reason, or at least it's not necessarily the new moon itself, but it's around this new moon period in March. Look at the Mars aspecting Uranus, square aspect. This is major. And because Uranus and Jupiter are together, it's a major trigger. So we need to be mindful of that. Then the full moon in March is a partial eclipse. It's a partial eclipse at 10 degrees of Virgo, Hasta, with Ketu. After what might have occurred around the new moon with the Mars square Uranus, this is now maybe the sort of aftermath in a way. It's needing some resolution here in Virgo. Mercury, you can see, is at the last degree of Pisces. And it's obviously going back and over this degree between Pisces and Aries. So this full moon in Mercury's sign is just adding to this kind of overwhelm, I would say. I think the mind will be overwhelmed. The collective mind and your individual mind will be overwhelmed by this point, March, April, May. And I just feel like we all need to kind of gear up to this and take breaks regularly. That's what I would say around this period. So then we're heading into the new year, a new lunar year. And this is, well, so much going on here. It's unreal. Again, remember the comet is likely to appear, a comet is likely to appear. I'll again share the links with that article I've just written and you can read it. But it's likely to appear in April. Around this time, April 8th, a total solar eclipse, 25 of Pisces, Revati. Revati is very much about shepherding souls. Like that literally can be the case in terms of souls dying. But it's definitely in terms of life changing, like moving from one stage of life to the next. Now, this is a new year called Krodhi. Now, if you look at this Sanskrit dictionary and you look at the word Krodhi, I guess, a literal translation of that is angry. So this is an angry new year, and this just adds to kind of the Mars energy. Now, what's happening is that all the planets are lining up in just 3 signs: Aquarius, Pisces, Aries. And with the Mars-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius and the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Aries, all Mars, Mars, Mars. Mars is about 3 signs anyway. And this Shula Yoga, as it's called in Vedic astrology, is sharp. It's destructive. It's angry. It's, yes, courageous, but it's going to create a lot of war-like situations. So I feel like this is a year where things can really escalate. The according to Jataka Parijata, this is the person born in the Krota year is an adulterer, addicted to evil ways, crafty, and an angry temperament. I mean, let's call a spade a spade. Definitely. I mean, it's going to be full on. It's going to be different for each place on the planet. You know, I've calculated this for where I am in Dublin, Ireland, but you could have it somewhere else. Wherever it is, it's still conflicted when you have all planets in just 3 signs, and it just creates this kind of mashup and a very intense kind of energy. And again, just because of these kind of conjunctions, it's might be nice to have Venus in Pisces and all of that and the eclipse, but no, it's Saturn, Mars on one side and Jupiter, Uranus on the other. You know, it's and then the Mercury retrograde at the very 0 degree mark, it's going back into Pisces on this day. So anyway, it's complicated, it's confusing, it's volatile, and it's going to be interesting for us astrologers, right? This is the full moon. 2 weeks later, April 23rd, 10 degrees of Libra. This is a full moon opposite an exalted sun. So that's something to be, you know, thankful for, that we're now heading into a more vibrant period. And I do think actually after everything that happens up until now, we are going to be looking ahead in terms of more hope, in terms of Jupiter moving into Taurus and away from all of this, in terms of the sun moving into exaltation. And during this period as well, we'll have the moon move into exaltation in, you know, April, May will be a nice kind of energy. Mid-April to mid-May is always a better energy in general. There's lots of complexities here, of course, because of the continual Mercury retrograde and all of that in Pisces, and Mars now joining it. It's just obviously complicated, but it seems to be like we're on this sort of cusp of something better. So May is and June, usually anyway, most years are when things get better, are the sweet spot in the year. This is the new moon, 23 degrees of Aries, Barney, lunar mansion here with Venus, with Uranus, you know, Jupiter one side, Mercury the other, which is now finally starting moving forward. There's definitely a lot of better energies going on here. When you have planets kind of either side, like kinder planets, benevolent planets either side of a new moon. So definitely this new moon feels a bit more positive, not a bit more, a lot more. Then we have the full moon 2 weeks later, 23rd of May, 8 degrees of Scorpio and Narada. It's a debilitated moon. You know, you have to take the good with the bad, right? It's like, or the bad with the good. And this is obviously a debilitated moon, a full moon at that. And it's sort of intense, right? But yet, opposite, you got Venus and you got Jupiter exactly conjoined. So this is like, I feel a bit shitty. So I'm going to party like you never, like you never seen, right? Jupiter and Venus together in Taurus is like really potential indulgence, like really overindulgence. And it may be that you just feel the need to because of the way you feel. And it could be just a really good time that you feel, yeah, why if you can't enjoy yourself now, when can you? I would put it that way in May. June, then we have a new moon on the 6th, 22 degrees of Taurus. Again, an exalted, this is an exalted new moon. Venus is close by, Jupiter's there, Uranus has now moved in, shaking things up, Mercury's there. June is like a party, like this is like party like it's 1999 kind of thing. This is going to be like full on in a good way, in a good way. But again, it's conflicted, as I mentioned, with the Saturn in Aquarius. This is the whole point, that there's still a lot of issues going on in the world, like, you know, and they're not going anywhere. Mars is now in Aries, very strong. And so we've got a lot of strength going on in June. You've got Mars in its own sign, you've got Saturn in its own sign, you've got Venus in its own sign, you've got Jupiter in Taurus leading it, like blowing that up. Mercury is in Taurus. You know, Jupiter now away from Saturn's gaze, at least. Jupiter away from the shadow of Rahu. There's just a lot going on that seems really, really positive. It's almost like too good to be true here, to be honest with you. I'm just saying it because of what else is going on, you know? 2 weeks later, then we have the full moon, June 22nd, the solstice. We have 6 degrees of Sagittarius, Mula. Mars is still strong, Saturn's still strong, Venus is opposite now with Mercury, very strong. Still really strong planets going on all summer. Yeah, so again, lots to enjoy here. July, new moon, July 5th, 20 degrees of Gemini, Purnarvasu. Again, Venus, Mercury's gone into Cancer now. Mars is still in Aries, it's aspecting Mercury. this new moon is in Mercury sign Gemini. There's a bit more volatility going on here, obviously, again. And again, the Saturn and Jupiter story continues in the square. But again, it's not aspecting, but now we have an exact aspect of Saturn onto Mars. So this feels a bit more conflicted in July because of that. As strong as Mars might be, it's under the thumb of Saturn. And that might not be a bad thing because you might not overdo it then. But Saturn can sometimes feel a bit limiting. 2 weeks later, then July 21st, full moon for Capricorn, Uttarashada. Now it's a full moon with Pluto, Sun in Cancer, with Venus. Yeah, I mean, and then the Mars as well, it's now moved into Taurus, if you see here, and it has joined the Uranus by this stage. So July, there is a trigger in July for sure because of the Mars joining Uranus. So this new moon from July is a major, major trigger. So you can see now the sweet spot really is May, June, and July is getting volatile already again, and really volatile. And like when you didn't think about it, when you're out partying and it's like something happens. Anyway, I mean, I don't want to put a dampener on you on your parties, but again, if you're going to decide on when to have that wedding, when to have that party, it's May, June, obviously. And when you want to be maybe mindful of these more explosive energies, and they could be explosive in a good way for you, but generally more explosive, then be mindful leading up to May and then after July or after June into July. August, then new moon, August 4th, 18 Cancer, Ashlesha. And then here we have Mars is still in Taurus, and now it's conjoined Jupiter for this particular new lunar month. That is again more fortunate. This is generally more fortunate when you have Mars and Jupiter together. And so I think that's more positive. Even if it's more like wanting to take action, it's like more positive action at least. And then 2 weeks later on August 19th, 3 degrees of Aquarius, Danishta, and Mars and Jupiter are still together. Like, so there's a powerful Mars-Jupiter combination, obviously. It's just too erratic maybe with the Uranus and the square to Saturn. Again, I would say, just as I did in 2023, I almost think that Saturn is like saving the day by being in Aquarius. If we didn't have Saturn in Aquarius in 24, I don't even know where we would be in terms of the world and world war even. I just feel like Saturn is putting it like a sort of limit on things, and it's just not going to allow things to escalate too much. It's still going to escalate, but maybe not too much. And I'm saying all of this because of July, August being major triggers as well. So September, new moon, September 3rd, Leo, Purva, Falguni. Venus has now slipped into debilitation. There's a bit of an aftermath now after the summer blowout. It's going to be feeling a bit of a dampener now. Although Jupiter is aspecting, and that's more positive. And Mars is also aspecting, so that's maybe less. But Jupiter aspecting, I think, is going to save the day along with Saturn keeping it together somehow. I think Jupiter is more positive overall. And it could be, like I said, with systems crashing or something happening or the economy just on a low, that there's this new impetus now and new something coming on board that feels more hopeful in a way. 2 weeks later, full moon is a partial lunar eclipse. We're heading into eclipses again by the end of September 18th, 1 degree of Pisces, Purva Bhadrapada. So now we've got this kind of Neptunian kind of eclipse, and we have, yeah, an interesting mix of energies and a debilitated Venus at the very edge of Virgo. So yeah, can Jupiter save Venus at this point when Jupiter is like instigating this new moon or this full moon and eclipse? It's just got a lot to do by the end of September. You know, we've got a lot of things to sort out here. And then in October is the eclipse. So this is a new moon annular. So you might as well call it a total solar eclipse at 15 degrees of Virgo. This is with Mercury. So this is, again, certainly compared to the April eclipse, more positive because an exalted Mercury as opposed to a debilitated Mercury in April. So, and Venus has moved into its own sign. So now you have a lot of strength going on here, despite it being an eclipse after all. But I do think that there's just a lot more holding this together. It's just that September period, maybe leading up to this, is an issue. But of course, remember, it's an eclipse and there's a comet, a brighter comet due here. So it's still going to shake things up. Absolutely. Just like the last October eclipse did. and continues to, this is going to shake things up again, of course. But it just feels like there's a lot more, with Mercury especially, keeping things sort of more level-headed, I think. 2 weeks later, full moon, 0 degrees of Aries, Ashwini. Venus has now moved into Scorpio. Mars has moved into Gemini. You can see here that the full moon is just peaked into Aries, with the sun just peaked into Libra. And so this is in its fall. So as is the case every year, mid-October, sun is in its weakest place. So we have to be mindful of that, of course. And again, Mars is playing a big part in this because of, Venus being in its sign and the full moon in Mars's sign. Mars is in Gemini, and let's not forget Mars is in its shadow now. It's in the retrograde zone. It's about to move into Cancer, into its fall. And it's like this eclipse is obviously, and the comet is going to show big changes in the months to come. And whether it's the US election or whatever else is going on, and many, many things going on, I don't know. Then we have a new moon, and which is Diwali. This is the dark night. And this is November 1st. This is when the sun is debilitated, the moon is dark, 15 degrees of Libra. Mars is also weak. Venus is in Mars' sign with Mercury. There's a lot more weakness going on in November. Now, there is always weakness going on in November. It always is a bit of a downtime. It's just on the foot of the eclipses and everything else that's going on. And now Mars in Cancer aspecting this new moon from November 1st. I feel like this is a bit more dire in many ways, but let's not maybe dwell on that. 2 weeks later, full moon, November 15th, 29 degrees of Aries, right at the edge of Aries. Again, Mars is ruling this. And so, yeah, we've got this Mars again now in debilitation, about to retrograde by the beginning of December. So, and the sun is in its weakest as well. And yeah, so this is definitely a challenging month, November. And then December, we have a new moon, December 1st, 15 to Scorpio, a debilitated new moon, a dark moon, a weak moon. The sun is at least out of its weakness, but Mercury is now retrograde. Mars is just about to start its retrograde in Cancer. This is a very complicated month, December. Then we have 2 weeks later, 15th, we have a full moon in Taurus, exalted, but it's again complicated because of Mars retrograde now and Mercury retrograde. Venus opposite Mars. There's a lot of complications here going on in December as well. And then finally, we have another new moon, a second new moon, and a second new moon for the year in Purvashada. So we started the year in Sagittarius with new hope for a new year, and we're finishing the year with new hope for what comes next year and wrapping up 2024. So Purvashada and Sagittarius is very hopeful, and sometimes maybe we go overboard with that. We have to kind of pare it back a bit when we get into Capricorn, as you might be feeling yourself now. It's like 2 weeks into the year, January 14th, as I speak. And it's like, yeah, we're on the cusp of something, but it's like we know we have to kind of stick with it now, moving into Capricorn. And we're going to feel like that again by the end of December into the new year, 2025. This is a reminder of all of the new and full moons. And again, you can just see the beginning, 11th of January, and the end, 30th of December, that new moon in Purvashada, that Sagittarius sign. So definitely feel like this year has got a lot of hope contained within it, but a lot of volatility as well. So my predictions for 2024, before I actually get into them, I want to actually talk about my predictions for 2023, because I do this every year. And although I do plan not to do this anymore, as I mentioned to you before, I don't want to make predictions, mundane predictions anymore, for several reasons, personal reasons, also because of what's going on in the world, and also because for me, it's so unsatisfying with mundane astrology, because I never have half the data that I want. And it's very hard to make predictions sometimes. And it's just not like enjoyable for me anymore. And I don't want to do it anymore. And so there you go. I do enjoy reading people's charts. I love that. And I love uplifting people with astrology. And I feel like in the last few years, there hasn't been a lot of uplifting astrology in the world in mundane sense. But individually, people are having like amazing experiences. And I've been having amazing readings with individuals. And I always feel high. I just feel like I've done a great job when I've done a reading for someone. And I always feel that they get something out of it. And it's always so positive, even when we're talking about the most dire things in some people's charts. Like I always feel like they come out of it feeling better about themselves. And I can't do that with mundane astrology. You can't uplift the world. You can uplift an individual, right? And that's all you need to do. And so, anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying this is my last major predictions, and I'm not going to talk about them anymore after this year. That's my promise to myself now. So, 2023, how did I do? It's quite easy to say there are a lot of changes any year, so I don't think that was a good prediction. Things progress more than in recent years. Yes, I think I got that spot on. And I was obviously referring to the Saturn in Aquarius and the AI new tech revolution, basically. And that's going to continue in 2024. By the way, I'm putting these in as well because I want to say that a lot of these are spilling into 2024. Extreme year economically, it has been. There's been a lot of things going on. I did get the stock market crash thing wrong. But I did say potential stock market crash, and I did think that Saturn would hold things together. So I did say that. But it has been extreme. There's been banks closing. There's been major highs as well in the stock market, that real artificial high, I would say, in terms of the AI. But then what is artificial? I mean, money's money. It's like, it's kind of artificial anyway. So I'm kind of rethinking my whole relationship to money, I guess. But like, it's all numbers on a screen. Yeah, it might not be cash in hand, but it's all like you give cash in hand a number anyway. I mean, it's all just numbers. Anyway, it's an extreme year economically, has been, and I do think that's going to happen in 2024. Supply chain issues continue. Yeah, inflation, all of that. The good thing about this, though, I think hyperinflation with the Saturn now no longer aspecting or having drishti on Jupiter, as it moves into Taurus, it might be in a square, but it's not aspecting in terms of Vedic astrology aspects, like looking at Jupiter. So that might mean that hyperinflation, well, two things. Now that Jupiter has been looked at by Saturn, actually in China, it's deflation that's the problem, right? And now that Jupiter is moving into Taurus away from Saturn, we could see maybe inflation being another problem again. But it's still, I think, better to get Jupiter away from Saturn and away from Rahu, especially Rahu, because that created this hyperinflation in the first place. So I think I'm looking at it more positive anyway. But again, maybe it's so positive that it's extreme. And again, the stock market and all of that. I'm not going to talk about the stock market ever again. I got the prediction wrong. So obviously I don't know what I'm talking about. But I do think it's going to be an extreme year. If you've got the head for that, great. So other predictions I made, major issues around healthcare, travel, and real estate. I mean, you could say that's an ongoing thing. Healthcare, I was thinking more about Saturn in Shadabishaj. That's continuing. I think there's been amazing advancements in healthcare. I think there's going to be more. Travel issues is going to be a major issue in 2024. I mentioned that in 23. It's going to be more so in 24. Real estate has been an issue in some countries, and whatever country you're focusing on, look somewhere else and you'll find a problem, I suppose. Housing market crash, yeah, you might say it has been somewhat. And I'm not sure in certain parts though. New monetary system crashing the old one. This hasn't happened yet, but again, I'm spilling this over into 2024. Centralized digital currency. Yeah, I mean they are implementing it slowly, but it seems to be happening slowly. I don't know. Will it happen? Will it have to happen quickly in 2024? Is the thing. This was really sort of my sort of bias coming in here. Universal basic income suggested in some countries. I'm probably a socialist at heart, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know if that's kind of pie in the sky. Political unrest worldwide, obviously. Uprisings, obviously. Russian regime challenge more. I mean, obviously, I think that's going to be more so by 2025 and 26. I think even like major uprisings and a complete collapse of the current regime. War in Ukraine initially escalate and then before ceasefires. I mean, I don't know. It has escalated and de-escalated at certain times, and it's going to go through that for some time. And likewise with the Middle East. The US may be drawn into direct conflict leading to US protests. Well, I think unfortunately I got this prediction right. But it might have been in 2024, as is happening right now. Leading to US protests. I don't know if it's going to get to that. I don't know if there's just too much going on in the US with the election year for them to be protesting about wars. I don't know. Nuclear or chemical warfare possible. Yeah, hopefully it won't go to that extreme, but don't forget, I'm talking about 2024 now. Even though I made this prediction 23, look at what's happening with Mars, Uranus, and Jupiter. That's worrisome, sure. And then the China thing is worrisome, as you might have just seen, who was elected in Taiwan. That's really worrisome. And in another way, I want to say, just to kind of center ourselves in this kind of moment, that it is all happening perfectly. And actually, it already has happened. It's already done, all of it. So instead of getting on this sort of bandwagon of oh, this is terrible, and they shouldn't do that, and this, that, and the other, it's already happened, all of it, everything, you know. So I think if we come to it from that perspective, from a more spiritual perspective, that is, I think whatever wars escalate in whatever part of the world, and whatever we call them, world wars or whatever, I think we have to be mindful of that, and mindful of ourselves and how we live our own lives. And I don't mean how we live our lives in terms of how we can look after ourselves. I mean how we can be more centered in ourselves when these kinds of things occur. Further divisions in the US. This is a huge one, and it will be for many years. I am holding back. So this is true, I think, but it's going to be more and more true in the years to come. I'm holding back on making predictions about the US presidency until June or July of 2024. And I have reasons for that astrologically, but we won't know who's running anyway. So until we know who's actually running at the end, I'm not going to make a prediction about who would win. So Joe Biden leaves office. I still have this prediction hanging there, and it's 23, 24, and he's like pushing it out, and he's hanging in there. And I don't know how long he's going to hang in there. But anyway, King Charles, this was a bit of a long shot, and I was kind of going on another prediction, to be honest, that I shouldn't have probably jumped on the bandwagon of. And Mario Redding's book, which is basically a book about Nostradamus predictions. And I kind of read the book and I thought, oh, this is impressive. He really did a great job decoding these predictions, but it is all just one prediction, really, he got right in this many predictions he hasn't got right. So, I mean, I don't know. King Charles abdicating, I was trying to tie it into the astrology, and certainly you can. And certainly you can just even say Saturn in Aquarius opposing Leo. And of course, we have the abdication in Denmark of the Queen. So maybe that is elsewhere and not King Charles. I don't know, but I'm not taking it off the table in 24. I'm just putting it out there. Others were shocking turn of events in the summer and in relation to war. Now, of course, it happened in the October, and I really didn't have my eye on the Mars Ketu conjunction in October. I was really so focused, hyper focused on the economy. Of course, if you think about Mars Ketu, of course it's attacks, and then you could see the subsequent, lunations kind of triggering it even more and escalating. In hindsight, all of it makes sense always, of course. Major issues with water, and that is going to be a major thing in 2024. I mean, more than 23, even more. Can you believe it? Viral outbreaks, there have been, they continue to be, there always will be. Massive technological advancements, yeah, I think that's obvious. Metaverse attempts a firmer footing, yet it shows its limitations. They actually haven't even brought out the Apple headsets yet. And I do think it's going to be a bit of a flop initially. They're not going to be just like the other device that you can hold in your hand and like talk to it and ask it to do all these different things for you. I do think they'll come out, but they're just not going to be as impressive as we hope. I almost feel like technology is just not as advanced as we would like it to. It's almost like we're on the cusp of all these potential flying cars and you name it, but it's not there yet. And so it's all this talk about what could be, but it's not yet. It's like buying a new gadget, and it's like we want the latest, but they're not great. The technologies that are coming out now, even ChatGPT, it keeps making mistakes. I've been experimenting with it. It really gets things wrong. So anyway, this is, by the way, Saturn and Aquarius, if you want to know the astrology. Advancements in treatments for diseases against Saturn and Aquarius, that's a big one. Mental diseases, I haven't seen that so much, but maybe. Certainly cancer treatments, all of these things, and testing for cancers, all of these things have become much improved with Saturn's transit through Aquarius. Regulations on drugs, again, I was thinking about Saturn. I haven't seen that so much. New regulations in healthcare systems. I was going on again. Saturn in Aquarius has always in the past brought about sort of these things. Medicare is a big one in terms of Saturn in Aquarius. New social media platforms, new laws and regulations. In fact, it may be more so the fact that it was not new social media, but like naming the Twitter renaming Twitter, maybe. Major social, societal reforms worldwide. I think that's an ongoing thing. Problems highlighted in communities, local and global. Grassroots movements. I haven't heard of them so much, but I'm sure there are. Just because you don't hear them on the news doesn't mean there aren't. So now let's get into 2024, because a lot of those, as you can see in 23, spill out over into 2024 and might actually be more so relevant in 2024. These are my predictions for 24. And again, this is the last time I'm doing this. I'm promising myself now, I'm not going to do this again. I'm not going to spend my time thinking about what's going on in a world that's kind of where it's going. And I'm going to focus on more of the potentials of astrology. So 24. Year of big climactic and economic changes. Absolutely. I see major issues climactic wise in terms of, oh, you name it, volcanoes, earthquakes, tsunamis, I don't know, major things. Energy infrastructure problems, blackouts, like attacks on infrastructure, literally. And I'm not going to give you all the astrology. I'll be repeating myself in terms of what I said earlier. It's all the things I mentioned. Major seismic activity that displaces many people. New digital currency and or volatility in current ones right? Obviously one might lead to the other. Further technological advancements and kickbacks, because this is the other thing about Saturn in Aquarius, is that it is also the kickback. It's the fear of what AI is doing. And also, by the way, the limitations of AI, like ChatGPT isn't that good yet. I mean, when you ask it questions, it gets it wrong. And the other thing I really think about Saturn in Aquarius is showing the limitations in terms of what it's limiting us in what we're doing. If you think about how with technologies, even like the smartphone, it's basically limited our capabilities. Like people texting can no longer correctly spell things, right? People who rely too much on GPS in the car don't know where they're going. People relying too much on AI to think for them and write something for them instead of thinking deeply about things. It's literally taking away our ability to think deeply about things. So technology is great, but it's great when we can use it, and it doesn't remove that ability to think deeply. Okay. New hopes for a better system, obviously, governmental, monetary, every which way. Jupiter is going to bring all of this need for something else, right? Summer indulgence, as I mentioned, May, June is like hedonistic, right? All of those combust planets in Taurus. Summer indulgence conflicts with many, many humanitarian crises at this point. Maritime and aviation issues. And again, I'm going to share the links with you in terms of all of these articles I've written, and including the Rahu and Ketu transit in Pisces, Virgo. This has historically always brought about maritime and aviation disasters, like major ones. We've already seen some of this, and we're going to see more. Fires, floods, cyber attacks, bombings, the usual. Wars escalate with a surprise attack and or potential new conflicts elsewhere on the planet. Lots of changes in governments, big election year, the biggest in history. We've got more elections going on this year than any other year in history. Major shakeups in 24. Assassination attempts in 24 and 25. It's a lot to do with the Pisces Rahu thing and others, and the Mars thing. And then maybe even a new pope, not wanting to predict that he is going to pass or anything, or that he is unwell. I think he is unwell, but he may step down. I don't know. But maybe changes otherwise in religious institutions. So there are my predictions. Let's see. The bigger picture, though, before we leave it, is that Saturn is going to move into Pisces and conjoin Neptune by 25 until 28. And this is where the New World Order emerges out of the ashes, really. And maybe not the ashes, but the sort of the floods. So I think that we're going to have to see a new order come out of this period. And that means, obviously, because of the current one completely collapsing in some places, obviously not everywhere. But certainly this Saturn-Neptune is tied intricately with the story of Russia. And it's also tied with China, but more so Russia. And we're going to see major issues there. The exact conjunction is July 25, and that's when Mars and Ketu conjoin in Leo, and that's the sign of governance. I mean, yeah, you can just see that this is going to be a major change in 2025. Jupiter is going to move into Cancer and oppose Pluto by 25, 26. This is both hopeful and also massive. Like, it's just massive swings of, like, hope and despair in a way. It's kind of like This is a signature in people like who are very generous with their money, oftentimes philanthropists, Jupiter, Pluto. And so we might see this kind of people coming in to rescue certain situations and a more hopeful situation overall from 25 to 26 as things are collapsing, remember. Then Jupiter, this is not moving way ahead now, though, into 2030s. This is when it's going to really become, well, again, I've used the phrase world war, but we might not call it world war at the time. I don't know. And it won't be a typical war, but it certainly will be a cyber war and all of that, and drones and all of that. But yeah, Jupiter, Pluto conjoined in Capricorn again by 2032, 33. That's a major downturn that if we haven't got our together, then it's going to be major adjustment at that point. And then at that time, Saturn, Uranus are going to conjoin. And first of all in Taurus and then in Gemini, and that is a signature for world war or an escalation in current wars, whether we call it a world war or not. So place yourself in that where you will. And I would say the best place to place yourself is centered in your own being. Because if the world is going this direction, then yeah, we have to think practically about where we want to be in the world. But we also have to think about where we're placed in our own being, because that is really ultimately all we can do with any of this. Like, what's the point in me telling you this? What can you do about a world war? It's already happened. It's happened. Everything that's ever will happen has happened in a way. So I know that sounds bizarre. And I know I'm an astrologer and I'm supposed to be telling you about a timeline and all of this and think in a linear sense. But no, it's actually already happened from a more spiritual sense. There's no sense of time only to the mind. The mind wants to like think about time in a kind of linear way. But if we can just move ourselves out of time and tap into that timelessness within our own being, if you feel like you can entertain this and you have the bandwidth, you have the capacity and the centeredness in yourself to do that and to practically do whatever you need to do, great. If you cannot, then avoid all of this completely. I probably should have said that at the beginning and not now, but certainly take everything I've said with a pinch of salt, like a whole heap of salt. And yeah, these are the articles that I've written recently about these kinds of topics, big topics. Some were hopeful for sure. There's definitely a lot of hope by mid-decade. I really feel hopeful about what's happening in mid-decade for sure. And even the world war that may, I don't know, of course, the world war that may be triggered by the end of the decade into the new decade, 2030s, that's not going to be like we imagine and not how I imagine, certainly. So, and it also is going to lead to something better when we look at further into the 2030s. So that's what I want to leave it with. I don't want to leave you with a sense of doom and gloom. So a reminder to join up for my Patreon. This is a 7-day free trial, patreon.com/timeline astrology. And if you do, you can get all signs. You can download your sign, sidereal sign, for free if you're a member. And you could literally just sign up as a free 7-day trial and actually download them. I'm pretty sure you can do that. I'm almost sure. I probably should have double checked with Patreon, but I think you can. And then you can also download this ebook, this new ebook called Intentional Astrology, and it's part 1, the houses. So how to approach the houses and your astrology in a more intentional way. Of course, this is the time of year we're thinking about these being more intentional. So that's, again, patreon.com/timeline astrology and /shop, or you can just go to patreon.com/timeline astrology or timelineastrology.com. Okay, everyone, thank you for watching and listening and bearing with me through this really long presentation. And again, reminder of that link on Patreon, and please like, please subscribe. I always forget to ask this of people and then they don't do it. So if people are not asked to do something, they never do it. So please like, please subscribe, please comment below, and not just comment just because to write something, but I really would like to hear your comments. I would really like to hear about your experience of these transits and your anticipation, your intention even for 2024. Okay, everyone, thanks for watching, and until next time.